OP10 format kicked off after the ban list in the One Piece trading card game with an exciting 4 different regionals happening across the world: Pasadena, London, Virginia, and Athens over in Greece. A lot of people were really curious about what the top decks were going to be, and there was a lot of conversation around some archetypes, especially ones that were hit with the ban list and who benefited the most from the ban list, especially since there's regionals coming up in both France and Peoria this upcoming weekend. A lot of people are looking at all these videos and these results and thinking to themselves, what do I need to know heading into this upcoming weekend? Different store regionals, big tournaments that I've got coming up in this format, especially before EBO2 comes out. But before we go all the information in this video, let's hear from a word from our sponsor. I know you guys are huge fans of Nen Garden, and they're sponsoring today's video with a giant deal going on right now. They've currently dropped their spring collection, releasing 3 new designs. If you're into One Piece, they've got the Whole Cake Island mat, which is beautiful with so many details. If you're looking to get into the Gundam trading card game this summer, they've got a beautiful, wonderful mat on the way, and also just anime fans in general can enjoy this Dandadan mat. They've got a spring sale going on right now, especially with the 3 of their new designs that they've put out, to where you can use the spring sale code for a buy one get one 30% off deal. And the cool thing about this deal as well is not only can you save money with the buy one get one 30% off, but you can also stack my code Atrocious to help support the channel and also save a couple more bucks. It's a great deal that's not going to last long, so make sure that you go click the link in the description, go ahead and get yourself some of the best mats in the TCG community. Anyways, back to the video. So right here is this spreadsheet that I've got of all of the populations of top cuts from this weekend's regionals. And a lot of this stuff also is over on Eggman Events' website. I'll link it in the description below. He's got some more information, you know, about the different events specifically that you can go look at if you want. He's a great friend of the channel and a great resource to the community. But if you want to see all of them at the same time, here's what it looks like. And I will say, with the top cuts, this is not necessarily a top cut. Pasadena was a one-day event, right? Because it was 512, I think, is the number, or 514, somewhere around there, a 500-person tournament. So it was a one-day, only Swiss, last person undefeated type of format. You also, in London, Virginia, and also, I think Athens was also top cut. You had top 32 bracket day 2, right? So after the Swiss, one undefeated left, you had top 32 compete in a bracket style second day to determine who the champion was. And with Athens as well, I don't think at this point that there is a full rundown of the Athens championships. We know a lot of different decks, right? I was able to compile, oh god, quick math. I was able to find 12 deck lists from the top 32 finishers in the event, and I've actually gotten them in this Imgur link, which shows a lot of the list. I don't think all 12 are on One Piece top decks, and I don't think Eggman's got it up either because it's an incomplete tournament in his eyes, so I will link this also in the description below. And if you're in the live YouTube or Twitch chat as well, I will link it right there for you in those chats, because we are actually doing this live on Twitch and YouTube. Now, another thing about these, if you're looking, you're wondering why these are highlighted. These were the winners of each tournament. The 4 winners of these different regionals were Nami, Lim, Ploofy, and Red Green Smoker. And I think a lot of people will say that 3 of these 4 winners were not expected. I personally will say, along with a lot of other people, and admit that Nami was the biggest surprise, or actually was Lim the biggest surprise? Let me know. Did you think Nami was a bigger surprise, or Lim, or Red Green Smoker? I think all 3 of those decks were the big surprises of their respected tournaments, and they showed up and did really well, right? I think Ploofy was the only one where people, if you were to ask them before these tournaments, okay, what do you think is going to win one of these 4 tournaments? I think they would say that Ploofy is probably one of the more likely candidates to win the event, being, just such a good deck. Being a purple Straw Hat Crew leader that can abuse Gum Gum Giant, heal life, swarm the board, it has a lot of pros that make it a top deck in the format, as I talked about in my tier list video heading into the weekend, which, by the way, I think was pretty spot on. Looking at these kind of one by one, right, it looks in a lot of these that these same decks are taking up the most population in each of these tournaments. Ploofy, Shanks, that's not Shanks, that's Teach. Teach, Shanks, and Dofi, right? I say Dofi even though, it's only one in the top 16 of Pasadena. Second most populous deck in London. The most populous deck in Virginia. And also, at this point, based on the 12 deck list that I could find, the most populous deck in Athens. And I think that probably holds true if you've gotten all of the different results, right? Because especially for these events, the 3 to 4 range is usually like a top 5 populous deck. And so I think heading into the weekend, you can kind of think that those 4 decks are probably the strongest decks that you can consistently see when you're going in through your rounds of your store regional or your Peoria championships or something of the sort. Some of the other biggest surprises, in my personal opinion, I think especially London, right? Not only did it get first and second within the top cut of London, right, being a huge surprise with Fletch winning with the Smile Fruit apple, right, but also 2 more being present alongside the first place and runner-up in there. Lim just having an incredible opportunity to dominate this event. It's without a doubt the biggest showing that it had over the weekend, and it really only appeared one other time in Pasadena. Now, do I think that Lim can explode and have more of a population for Peoria, for France, at your local regional championships? Absolutely, right? I think a lot of people have been summarizing as Lim being kind of the new Dofi. You're kind of this like low to the ground, splash out characters on the board, right? And just overwhelmed with these 4, 5 cost characters that you've got and just swing, 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 swing. Especially when your leader effect inherently ramps to be able to play more characters out, even though your leader effect forces you to play characters rested. It wouldn't surprise me if in the top cut of either of the regionals this weekend that we see Lim have multiple appearances, right? I know that Fletch's version of the deck, I mean, I just I quote tweeted the second place finisher Raphael Nevin's tweet about the limbs that were going on right now, and it did pretty good numbers, and I'm not like a big Twitter guy or anything like that, so I think a lot of people have follow me on Twitter, I think a lot of people have picked up that attention to Lim and are really focused in on trying to play it. I've even had a couple people message me to ask if they can borrow my Lim deck before their upcoming championships or tournaments to try out the list. I think another one of the surprises in these tournaments was Usopp. Now, although Usopp at this time wasn't present in Athens and wasn't present in the top decks in Pasadena, had really strong showings within Virginia and London, right? Being 4 decks in London and 3 decks in Virginia. It's a big joke that Usopp was the biggest loser out of the ban list, right? Kind of knocking down a little bit its best matchup in Doflamingo. But I think Doflamingo just still being so popular and Rob Lucci still having some big showings, right? Especially in that London and Virginia, having a mirrored amount of decks in there. I think Usopp could continue to trend a little bit more upward more than people thought about this deck that really wrote it off early. We did also kind of get, speaking of London, the overall number of decks. This is courtesy of Luigi Amato over on YouTube, great creator, Twitter, Twitch, excellent person in the community. He posted a screenshot from the overall deck population in the event, and the number 1 deck in that event was 186 Shanks. I think that that's probably pretty close, I would say, to the number that would reflect in most of the tournaments that happened over this past weekend. Shanks just being argued as a great leader, having plenty of 50-50s across the board and have kind of a flexibility, as I mentioned in my tier list video, of play style that you can go towards a control heavy oriented deck or a aggro oriented deck or anything in between based on what you feel like the meta provides. And wouldn't you know it, if you look at my little statistic right here, out of all 4 of these events that we have right now, tied the most populous deck in these different 4 regionals. I will say that probably Shanks takes over for the top spot if we had a full list in Athens, because at this point, out of the 12 decks that I was able to grab out of the top 32, there's no Shanks in here left. And I would imagine that at least one of the Shanks made it in through the top. Marshall D. Teach, also just a really, really great leader, right? I talked about being one of my top 3 decks in the format. It was the second most populous deck in the event, and especially, you know, you can sneak by a couple rounds just simply because of your leader effect, but the top players doing really well with it. 3, the second most populous deck in Pasadena, top 16. Tied the 3rd most populous deck in London, top cut. The 2nd most populous deck in Virginia, and having at least 1 appearance in Athens as well, with 12 in total. And through a lot of these matchups, you're stalling if your opponent just has a big slow start can be worthwhile on your way to success. Doflamingo being the 3rd most populous deck in London. Again, and we saw a lot of people talk about this. I think Dog Wisdom, who actually did well in this event in London, I think he got top 4. He's one of the Dofies in Top Cut. Wrote a whole article about how Doflamingo is still a great deck, right? And is still an incredible option to be able to play, right? Just because it lost Jinbei doesn't mean the leader's dead. I think they did a really, really good job balancing Doflamingo to level it off more on the ban list, which I thought was weird at the beginning, but it worked out for us out here in the West. Purple Luffy being 80 right in the London Championships. This doesn't surprise me in terms of population in the top 4, and then Bonnie being number 5. I think the only one that I would have switched if I were to have taken a guess would be Don Quixote, Doflamingo, and Purple Luffy, because I think just Purple Luffy is a better option right there. So looking at both Peoria and France, this is the tier list that I made exactly in that last video, going over what I thought heading into this past weekend of Pasadena, Athens, London, and Virginia. And I think it was pretty good, but I think there's definitely some changes that we can make into this list. I'd imagine Lim's gonna have to go up. I'm really curious on Lim. I think Lim's position in the meta is going to be very prevalent after this next upcoming weekend, right? Because we have France regionals, we have Peoria regionals. I think Lim, like several other decks, was definitely like a surprise deck. It was so surprising to a lot of people how Lim did it, but the different people that did run it, the person who got 9th in Pasadena, and also I think at least 3 of the 4 people that topped with it in London, they were all revolving around the same idea of that Lim doesn't need the top end, right? The top end is the 6-cost Sakazuki, and everything else is like the 3s and 5s package with the deck. So what's really going to be interesting is if knowing into that Lim does well heading into this weekend, because I do think that Lim is going to be much more popular into this weekend, but is it going to be able to survive? It is very Dofi-like. I think it's really dependent on the coin flip. Like if you're going first, your win percentage is so sky high, and then if it's not first, it's definitely not as high, right? I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the meta adjusts knowing that Lim exists a little bit more, but I definitely would not mind switching Lim and Smoker on my tier list, although it did win Athens and was super good, right? The person that ran it did so well. I think they started out in the first round getting the loss, right? They lost in the very first round, then made it up to top cut, and then won the whole tournament in general. Outside of that, Smoker did nothing this tournament. I mean, looking across the floor in Pasadena when I was there, just checking out all the different decks, not really a high Smoker population, and I think a lot of people felt the same. I mean, we even got the official London statistics, right, of the overall population, thanks to Luigi Amato, and if you look, Smoker, way down here, there was just as many red-purple Luffys as there were red-green Smokers in there. So I think red-green Smoker really underperformed. Who knows, maybe we see more of a population of red-green Smoker over in Peoria in France after seeing the regional winning list, right, of Athens. But I think for now, probably the switch that I've got right here is definitely okay. I think another one that I'm going to have to move, especially with this smoker, is move it down into the tier 3 category. I think that smoker is good, and I think it is definitely in a position to be able to do well. But I think the problem is that Rob Lucci just has a way better leader effect than you, right? The -1 happens on both Rob Lucci and Smoker, but I think being able to build up your trash those cards, especially on the attack, and do that -1, especially in the CP9 engine or CP0 engine, whatever you want to call it, just makes it a much more stronger option. And I think Rob Lucci also just stays at this tier right now. Even though you have excellent answers to stuff like Marshall D. Teach, right, with that Tashigi, it almost feels like in that matchup specifically, you have to go in with the Tashigi. And if you don't see it, which by the way, probably not getting a lot of draw without that Sengoku and that brand new, right? You're just going to have to naturally find it. And I think that's a little bit hard sometimes against Teach. I think I'm also going to have to move Marco into the tier 3 category as well. I've played against a couple Marcos over in Pasadena at the Pasadena regionals, not necessarily in the main event. It was more so the side events. And I just feel like Marco's missing a couple pieces right now, and it's missing a format to where it's more dominant like it is in OP11, right? In OP11, that control Marco definitely brings it up a notch, and we're definitely moving it up on the tier list when that happens. But until it does, I think some things are a little bit more out of your control, especially with some of these other decks that are coming up that maybe overwhelm you or stop you from doing what you want to do. I also think I'm going to move Red Purple Luffy down. I feel like with a lot of these decks, Red Purple Luffy just insanely struggles against a lot of these different matchups, right? Although I was like decently high on it in this 2.5 tier, you play against a lot of these top decks and it's like, what can I do a lot of times? The 3 life 6,000 power leader, even though it's really good in OP11, it doesn't really feel the same, and Gum Gum Giant I don't think can carry you enough in this color combination. I did think it was really cool that we saw, I think it was in London, it might have been Athens, that a red-green law made it. I think it was Athens actually, that a red-green law made it in top 32. So I was pretty good, I think, on this call right here that he's still like up there. Yeah, the buggy deck kind of stops it, but at like a regional or something, I wouldn't expect to play against buggy. Yeah, I mean, I think ST21 Luffy has kind of like the Zoro effect sometimes, where like you just go too fast for your opponent. It's just starter deck 21 Luffy just isn't as good as, you know, like OP01 Zoro, right? OP01 Zoro just does what Luffy does a little bit better. That's like my thinking of the deck and whatnot. I think I'm also going to move up Usopp into tier 2 and Kid back down to 2.5. I still think Kid is a very respectable deck, and I was excited to see a couple different tops across this past weekend where Kid made it within the top cut. But I definitely wanted to move up Lim and Usopp based on their performances, right? Because in London and Virginia, Usopp had great appearances and things of that nature, and they were very much higher than Kid. So I feel like if I got to move him up, I got to move Kid back down. Still a respectable deck, still a good deck, right? If you want to play it in the upcoming regionals and stuff like that. But I think that Eustace Captain Kid is more of a rogue option compared to something like Usopp and Lim, especially after their performances recently. Thoughts on bringing Bello Betty to an upcoming regional? I think Bello Betty is a decent deck, but I think the problem with it right now is there's too many decks right now that know how to counter you and stop you what you're doing, right? Bello Betty is one of those decks that, like, I would definitely start playing now if you have it and you want to get good at it, because in OP11, it's gonna be like a top 5 deck in the format just simply because it dominates Blue Purple Luffy. So I would definitely be on the lookout for Bello Betty, but I wouldn't move it any higher than, you know, these decks that I've got here in 2.5. Definitely a good rogue one that your opponent probably will not expect to play against. I would agree that I think that Bello Betty is a extremely pilot dependent deck to where like you need to know exactly when to use your leader effect. You need to know exactly when to take life, establish your board, battle bodies versus battling life. It's very complex despite it being like a $15 deck. I'm still going to hold Reiju right here, but I do think that it's definitely a good deck, right? It can hold its own in the meta. We saw Renee, one of the members of our community, make top 32 over in Greece with the deck, and it had another appearance, I think, in Athens. No, Renee was in Athens. I think it was London or Virginia where a Reiju made it in. And I've been playing Reiju a lot. It's definitely a good time if you want to play Reiju because I think it's also like a pretty cheap deck. But I think Reiju is still going to be in here in this 2.5 category. It definitely needs to have an appearance like these two in order to move up on my list. And I think the final deck that I'm going to move up is actually Nami. I think I'm going to move it up into tier 2. And I know Adam just won with it, and that's not the only reason that I've moved it up into tier 2, because I am a Nami simp, for those of you that don't know. But Nami is debatably the most pilot dependent deck that we've got in this format. That's why that when Adam wins back-to-back Pasadena regionals, it's really, really good. But look at Adam's matchups. Adam in his matchups on the way to win beat 4 Blackbeards and 2 purple Luffys. 6 rounds of what a lot of people thought were bad matchups. He absolutely wiped the floor of them, right? And especially when you talk about like these couple rounds right here, like sure, maybe the first and second round, like people just didn't really know what they were doing potentially. I don't know. But you cannot argue that like the late rounds of this Blackbeard and this Pluffy, when both players are 4-0, 5-0, it's not like they don't know what they're doing with their deck. And talking to Adam afterwards in Pasadena after he won, I asked him because I saw him post this and I was like, oh my God, you destroyed Blackbeard. I was like, how did you beat so many Blackbeards? And he said, I'm very favored into Blackbeard. He was extremely confident that 9 times out of 10, he is going to beat a Blackbeard. And I think that speaks a lot, I mean, to what Nami is as a deck. I mean, you look at this. I'm convinced that Nami has a great matchup into Shanks, right? Bonnie, I think it has a good matchup. Usopp, I think it has a good matchup. Adam is convinced that Teach is a good matchup. Pluffy is probably, I didn't ask him about this one, but I would say probably is a more manageable matchup. And Dofi, Lucci, right, getting better matchups as they were hit by the ban list, right? Dofi can't just go Jinbei Weevil for 2 turns in a row and then just kind of win the game after that. It takes a little bit more to be able to beat a Nami. So I think out of a lot of these matchups that are in these upper tiers, the decks that you are more than likely going to face a lot of times at a regional, I think Nami does really well into it. And especially if you're going to take Nami to a regional like Adam, you are going to know that deck inside and out. You're going to know the matchups inside and out. And I don't think a lot of these decks should probably think about hitting a Nami at a regional. You definitely want to be aware that Nami is a deck and maybe know what to do against it. But if you're going in with a Shanks deck, I don't expect to play a Nami in here. It's debatably, out of all these decks in the first 2 tiers that I have, it's going to be the least populous deck. By far. It's crazy the different matchups, especially after talking about it and thinking a little bit more. And just like most other regionals, when you have a wide and diverse format, right? Zoro, even though it is a probably bad matchup, you can still beat it, right? Just simply because what you have access to in your deck, right? Technically, any deck can beat any deck. There's no 100-0 matchup truly. So it's like, okay. Plus Zoro, I don't know if I want to keep, I'm going to keep Zoro up here because I do believe in the traditional Zoro, right? We saw Philip Vu do awesome with Zoro over this past weekend, and I think it's a deck that could catch a little bit more steam, especially in mono red. But I honestly don't think there's like a ton of Zoros running around. At least last weekend there were not. Maybe this weekend there are more Zoros. Because, I mean, I think traditional Zoro is definitely better than Zoro. But also, I think Zoro is probably way more populous at like the X1, X2 tables rather than the XO table, especially when you get later into the tournament. It's really interesting, you know. the way Nami's positioned, but I'm high on it. Seeing the matchups that Adam played convinces me that Nami is a tier 2 deck, because it absolutely destroyed the 2 matchups that I thought were gatekeeping Nami in this format. I thought these 2 decks were gatekeeping Nami in this format, and she just slaughtered them. This format's really, really cool. And I think this format, because it's so wide, like most other wide formats, are very dependent week by week on like what the top decks are and what rogue matchups appear, right? Based on like the top decks. I don't know if these 3 like really change. I think really just this shuffles and these move, but I think these stick as the top. And I'm really close to putting Doflamingo up there. I really am. I'm going to put Dofi up there. You know what? Last second Hail Mary, I am going to put Dofi up there, mostly because I've said this numerous times, I'm still a believer that Dofi is a top deck in the format. And if you look at the different regionals that happened over this past weekend, Doflamingo was the most populous deck if you add them all up together in the information that we do know out of Athens. So I think it's almost disrespectful to not call Dofi a tier 1 deck, right? Because it matches the amount of decks in the tier. I mean, it goes higher with matching the population, such as like Purple Luffy and Bonnie, right? I think it's like the third most, was it the third most populous deck in London? Yeah, the third most populous deck in London, and it showed out, right, for all of those tournaments. So you know what? I am going to put Doflamingo at tier 1. I was high on it before, but I think after this past weekend, I'm even higher on it because it's like, dang, it's still really good. We need Vegapunk. Somebody play Vegapunk this weekend and win a regional. I know Vegapunk just won the Chinos Cup. Gotta bump Buggy up. I'll move Buggy up when I see it in a top cut, If you make top cut of Peoria or France or a Treasure Cup or whatever, I'll move it up. I promise. But no, until I see Buggy top cut, I will not move it up. I think there's too many answers to the 7 cost. I mean, like, you have really neat board swarm and you have really cool like filter systems in the, is it the Dracula Mihawk that draws 2, trashes 1? And the like stage, right? If you choose to play that. I don't know. I just think some of the other swarm decks are just better, and like your win condition for the, like in a lot of matchups like Dofi just being the 7 drop, like Dofis are playing Red Rock now, and so like all they got to do is just Red Rock,